Hello everyone, this is Frank DeFreitas and welcome to HoloTalk, the Internet's laser and holography talk show, enjoyed in over 42 countries throughout the world. And now, here's this week's show. Hello John, how are you? It's Frank DeFreitas.
Hey Frank, good to hear your voice.
Good to hear your voice too. How would you like to start off? I mean, when I visit your site, I've known of your site for a long time now. I find it an amazing resource not only for the work that you've done over the years in holography, but also for some of the priceless photos that you have on there as well, historically speaking.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad you like that. Yeah, I've been very fortunate to have been a witness to some of this, I think would be the way to characterize it.
Mm-hmm. When you were growing up, you lived in Oak Ridge, right?
Correct.
What was your connection with Oak Ridge? In those days, was that just a town, or were you with a military family or something?
No, Oak Ridge was, created during World War II as part of the Manhattan Project.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of young people converged on the town from all over the United States because they had either special skills or because they were local folks that needed work. And as a result, John Fairstein was one of the results of that collaboration of people. After the war, in addition to the Manhattan Project facilities, the Oak Ridge National Laboratory had been created. And there was a tremendous amount of research going on there, and continues to this day. It's one of the premier laboratories in the world. That's where you
saw your first laser demonstration, was at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory.
And that was just that was a real epiphany for me. I think I was like 11 or 12 years old, and my father took me down to the high school auditorium where this was in like 1963 or 64, shortly after the first helium neon laser had been demonstrated.
Yeah. You don't happen to remember the early manufacturers. Was it a division of Hughes Aircraft that was making the first Heaney lasers in production? Do you know?
Gosh, I don't remember. I remember Joe Don and...
Yeah, I remember those too, yeah.
And some of those folks that got early start. And one of the companies that a very early starter was called PSR. Incorporated here in Oak Ridge, and they made lasers for research. And this was the same group of guys, Percy Statz, Henry Morgan, Miles Skidmore, and George Werner, among other ones, who put on this demonstration at the high school.
Okay.
And it was astounding. I mean, we had never seen laser light, and they had it bouncing all around the auditorium. At that time, they were even transmitting sound over the laser beam.
Wow.
And, this was a laser that they had made. They had their own glass blowing shop.
Okay.
Their own facilities. And these guys when they read the original papers, they were all over it and immediately began building their own lasers. And of course, they wanted to demonstrate it to the community. So it was just astounding. I mean, and for me, a little kid, to see this was I never forgot it. I can clearly remember to this day sitting there and looking at that beam and the speckle pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Just astounding. And I continued. I've known those guys ever since. And in fact, an interesting little sideline story is that when Dr. Jiang from the now famous Lake Forest College was actually employed at ORNL shortly after that, and for some reason, all of his paperwork hadn't been completed yet, so he was kind of twiddling his thumbs. And these guys said, well, listen, you might want to play around with this thing, these lasers and this new thing called holography. So Dr. Zeong spent a year at ORNL with sort of free access to some big granite tables and lasers, and that's where his holography career got started. It was right here in Oak Ridge.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Now that is an interesting side story.
And to this day, I think one of those guys that had demonstrated that laser to me, Henry Morgan, he and Dr. Zeong are still, I'm assuming they're still in communications.
Yeah.
I haven't talked to Henry in a long time. But
let me ask you this. Do you happen to remember during the demonstration what applications they mentioned the laser was used for presently and future applications?
Well, they it's been a long, long time, 1963,
sure,
a long time ago, but I distinctly remember them transmitting sound over the beam, which, was amazing to everyone. And I think they also discussed the idea of transmitting, not only sound, but data and other information. At that time, I don't think holography had been popularized, so I don't think that was part of the discussion. But certainly, transmitting data and sound was.
Yeah, it must have been very close to, or very shortly after Emmett Leith at the University of Michigan with the first laser transmission hologram up there.
Correct.
Yeah. So after that, what did you do? Did you still continue to have an interest in lasers, and that's what eventually led you out to San Francisco in the 70s?
Well, I had attended college in Ohio, and a couple of my classmates were Lon Moore and Randy James, who have later achieved a prominence in holography.
Oh, yeah.
And we all three of us went to San Francisco, where our college had started a branch program out there under the auspices of the University Without Walls, which was a great idea. The idea being that the university would just have an office, and that our classroom would be the entire community.
Mm-hmm.
So
they were actually just starting that in Philadelphia when I was in high school with High School Without Walls as well.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, I thought that was a great idea, and so I jumped on that opportunity, and Lon and Randy James also came out there. And in the course of our studies, Lon was introduced to Lloyd Cross, and Lloyd came to the college and put on a little demonstration of holograms. And what he did was he had these big, I guess they were about 1 foot diameter cardboard tubes that were maybe 3 or 4 feet high, and he put the laser down in the bottom, a little 1 milliwatt laser, and put a lens on it, and then put the hologram on top of the tube. So it made a very nice little simple display.
Mm.
And these holograms were just terrific. They were 4x5s and 8x10 transmission holograms that were illuminated by this laser down in the base of the tube, and they were just crystal clear. They were completely noise free, just beautiful holograms.
Yeah. Laser transmission holograms are beautiful holograms.
Yeah, and they had tremendous depth, and it's exactly like in your interview with my good friend Steve Province, where he says that you have this small epiphany when you see this,
mm-hmm.
and that's exactly true. You see it, and your pupils contract, and your whole body becomes rigid, and you're just astounded by what you see.
Mm-hmm.
And even today, when I see a hologram, it has a similar effect. Well, I was just completely captivated, and immediately signed up with the School of Holography to take the basic holography class. And there I met, of course, I already knew Lon, and I met Fred Untershare and Gary Adams and Lloyd Cross and Michael Kahn and all of the denizens of the School of Holography, and was introduced. Lloyd conducted a lecture in the back of the School of Holography that described some of the physical principles behind the whole thing, and then Lon or Gary or whoever would come out and give us some instruction in the basic techniques of sandbox holography. And what they had done is they had built sort of a 4 by 8 foot box out of cinder blocks and filled it full of sand. And this was based on an idea that Jerry Pethick had introduced. And then we mounted all the optics on the ends of PVC pipe and stuck it in the sand and arranged it. And then after you had everything arranged, you let it settle for 30 minutes or so and then shot your hologram. Well, you just can't imagine something more exciting than that.
Especially in 1973.
Yeah, when you see your first hologram, it's just, I mean, you know, they were very primitive, you know, what I was doing, but gosh, it was so exciting. And, you know, and then they, you know, there was all these things that began to develop out of there. You know, they began to experiment with, I remember Steve Benton came and showed a rainbow hologram. Well, immediately everybody at the school started scrambling around, scratching their heads, trying to figure out, well, how did he do that? And within 3 days, Lloyd had completely figured the whole process out, and we were shooting rainbow holograms down there. And then it was just a couple of steps away to the multiplex holograms, and you know, I can't say I was an active participant. I sort of lurked in the whole thing, but I got to witness a little bit of the first camera, the first multiplex camera, and then some subsequent developments of that. So, just fascinating.
Certainly nothing wrong with just being a witness to all that happening for the most part. I would compare that to someone saying, well, all I did was just sit on the floor while the Beatles were recording.
Well, I'm very fortunate to have witnessed all that. So
now, an address keeps popping up into my mind tonight. Maybe you can resolve this address for me. What does Shotwell Street mean to you?
Well, that's where the school
is. That where that was? Okay.
I think it was 454 Shotwell Street or something like that. And,
okay.
You know, it was this enormous warehouse that was kind of divided into two halves, and on one half was the holographic studio, and there was, I don't know, 3 or 4 of these sandbox setups that allowed them to teach classes, and then they had an experimental, a little dedicated, what they called a holographic camera that was used to make reflection holograms. Then there was another little area where they were building up the multiplexer, and then on the other side, the folks that were active, like Gary Adams and Pam and Lloyd and Michael and all those folks lived on the other side. They kind of had little loft areas where they lived.
Pam is the woman that eventually wound up in Lloyd Cross's Kiss, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Pam Brazier. And there was just any number of people that floated through this warehouse, and, you know. And
well, what type of people were they? Were they artists? Were they scientists? It was
kind of a combination.
Yeah.
Some of them were very technical. I remember there was a guy there that worked directly with Lloyd, and Lloyd had created this method of stretching a membrane across a speaker, and then attaching a small mirror to it and producing light shows.
I remember that.
Well, this guy, I don't remember his name, but he was kind of a, what we would call nowadays a geek. You know, he was sort of a very technical person and very able to concentrate his energies on this particular problem. And then there were other people like Pam and other folks that were more artistic and, had very creative ideas about how holography could be applied to the visual arts and just a whole mix of different folks in there that all of them were just brilliant and energetic and it was a fantastic environment.
Oh, that's incredible.
I guess I'd also like to point out something. This whole, from my point of view, from what I've seen, holography is as much a social, a kind of a social dynamic as it was a scientific or engineering or artistic media, because it attracted so many diverse people with different ideas and kind of a very free thinking at that time. And you got to remember that the political landscape at that time was we were in the midst of the Vietnam War. We had entered into a deep recession, and there were just tremendous political forces swirling around this cavern called the School of Holography. So it was quite a scene.
You eventually started your own company out there as well, right?
Yes, we did. Lon Moore and Randy James and Fred Untershare and I and Nancy Corleone and her friend Dave, we started, and our friend Constance Lubin, started what we called Celestial Holograms, which was based out of a house in the Richmond district of San Francisco. And we found a house that was sort of isolated from a lot of traffic and had a big basement in it. And we built an enormous 5-foot by 10-foot sandbox that had on a huge concrete slab. And I think the idea there was that we wanted to have long throws for our beams so that we could produce some good quality 8x10 masters without having to purchase collimating lenses and optics. And Michael Kahn, my dear friend Michael Kahn, built us a laser, and in typical Mike Kahn fashion, it was a bare bones laser that all the power supply was just completely exposed, and the high voltage was just right there, and had a long tube with a manually adjusted mirrors on it that we had to constantly tweak those mirrors to get it into single mode operation. But we started immediately producing some holograms, and we'd take them down to the waterfront and sell them on the street. And that was so exciting because people, tourists would come and they'd see that, and they'd never seen anything like that. And we'd go out on a sunny day. We didn't take any lights or anything. We just used the sunlight. And the reaction of people that came to see these simple holograms was just fabulous. I mean, they were delighted. So,
well, you know something, John? I bet you would have the same reaction today.
I believe we would.
I bet you would.
I believe we would. It's like Steve Providence says, when you see it, you have a small epiphany. And, it's almost a small orgasm when you see, a visual orgasm when you see these things.
Mm-hmm.
So we chugged away and produced holograms and tried all different kinds of things. And, we were under all of us were under a lot of personal financial pressures, and we were all very creative and independent-minded people. So eventually the thing, we kind of separated, but the spirit kept going. I think Fred went on and wrote his famous book and went on and did just some tremendous things. And of course, Lon started a whole business and was very successful at that. And Randy later worked with Steve McGrew, and then took over that whole operation of holographic mastering, and I think he continues with his Pacific Holographics. I'm not sure of the name of it.
Yeah, I was just out on his website the other night.
Nancy Corglione, of course, went on and did some tremendous work and collaborated with Michael Kahn on some vacuum deposition stuff. And I'm not sure what happened to her friend Dave, but everyone went on and continued on and was successful in their various spheres of holography. So that was a very seminal little company, that's Celestial Holograms.
Where did people envision this all leading? Did you think 10 years, 20 years? Well, what was the general thought as to where all this was going and where it would lead?
Well, I'm not a good person to ask that question because I was sort of in the moment, and I didn't have the ability to think very far out. But the initial excitement that from the very first moment that I saw Lloyd's holograms there at Antioch West just propelled me along for about 15 or 20 years. I think some of the other folks, I think Fred and Lon and Randy, had a longer range vision about where they fit into holography and what they wanted to do with it. Mm-hmm. And I think that they each in their own personal way were able to achieve their goals. I sort of was blowing in the wind for about 15 or 20 years, I'd say.
Well, I certainly can appreciate your outlook of living in the moment, because I strongly believe in that myself. So we're two birds of a feather when it comes to that, even today, every day. Yeah. As long as you take care of today, tomorrow it usually takes care of itself.
Yeah.
With that in mind, what we're going to do is let's take a quick break, because what I'd like to do is put this into two parts, because we're coming up on to close to 25 minutes. And I like to keep the file sizes manageable, because we do have a lot of listeners that are overseas on dial-up connections, and I try to keep the file sizes small. So let's take a quick break, and we'll come back. And for those of you who are listening to it this week, next week we'll have part 2.